some people do, leap first for the, oh, it's useful. For example, why preserve the Amazon rainforest? Oh, because we might be able to get drugs from the bark of trees. Maybe we can, but that's not why I want to preserve the Amazon rainforest. So I'm the Carl Sagan, the wonder of space, the beauty of the universe, the awe-inspiring nature of deep space, deep time, of deep complexity in biology. I don't go for exploding custard, whiz-bangs, and things like that.
Well, okay, that's a really good point you pointed out, because my area of research is in something that, in all fairness, has absolutely no practical utility whatsoever. And the thing is, I'm often asked to apologize for that, and it is interesting to me that people ask, you know, what's the point of doing that if it's not useful? But they never ask that, or very rarely do they ask that about art or literature or music. It's not, those things are not going to produce a better toaster. And for me, I have to agree with you completely that the most fascinating thing about science is the ideas, is the lifting of the human spirit. And we remember the Greeks not for their plumbing, or the Romans not particularly for their plumbing, but largely for their ideas. And why we have to justify that when we talk about science amazes me. And there's a quote that I like to use from the first head of the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, which is a particle accelerator. Right now, in fact, it's the most energetic particle accelerator in the world, soon to be surpassed by a machine in Geneva, as may be many things about this country. And he was asked to testify before Congress, and he said, they asked him, would this aid in the defense of the nation? A typical thing. And he said, no, but it'll help keep the nation worth defending.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's really important. When I, for some reason or other, get asked to talk to teachers a lot, and I tell them that I think the biggest mistake that any teacher makes is to assume their students are interested in what they have to say. Now, it's actually true for, it doesn't have to be a teacher, it could be car salesman, politician, anyone. I really do think you have to work and reach people where they are before they'll even be receptive, because they won't understand how it relates to anything they're interested in. So when I'm trying to reach people about science, I try to go to where they are in some sense, or work very hard. And that was the purpose behind the Star Trek book, for example. People, I think as a biologist, maybe you have this happen less to you than I do as a physicist, but when people ask me at a party, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm a physicist. And then they say, well, how about the baseball season? And
I'm shocked. I'm horrified by that.
Yeah, I know it. It's true. But then you say, well, what about time travel or something like that? And then people realize they're fascinated by those ideas, but they don't make the leap and realize in some sense that that's science, that the things that intrinsically fascinate people are really the things that we're lucky enough to be able to, in general, be paid to do. And so I think one has to try and find a hook. And as I say, in biology, you may not have found the hook, although the hook, in this case, one of the big interests, of course, is evolution, and it's kind of an anti-hook nowadays, and at least in the United States, the fact that evolution is so fascinating as an idea. And I think, by the way, that we physicists are also largely to blame in many ways for the fact that Darwin isn't appreciated more than he is. We did a wonderful public relations campaign for Albert Einstein, but I have to say, as I, over the last few years, have spent time in the public debate about evolution versus intelligent design, I really do think that if I had to pick the greatest scientist of the last few hundred years, it would be Charles Darwin and not Albert Einstein. That a single person could so radically change an entire field, and combining observation and theory just amazes me. And we really should be promoting what a remarkable...
What Darwin explains is everything about life. Human life, animal life, plant life, the diversity of life, the complexity of life. Everything is explained by one simple idea. It's an idea so simple that you can express it, actually, I think, in a single word: heredity. Once you've got, on a planet anywhere in the universe, high-fidelity replication of coded information, I think everything else then follows. You'd probably need to add a little bit more than that. On the other hand, when you compare the achievement of an Einstein with a Darwin, a Newton with a Darwin, I think you need to be a lot brighter to be an Einstein. I mean, any fool could have been a Darwin. Let me clarify that. It's somewhat baffling to me why we had to wait for our Darwin until the middle of the 19th century, 200 years after we had to wait for our Newton. You would think that the idea of evolution by natural selection could have occurred to any philosopher in an armchair from the Greeks onward. Not one of them got it. Not a
well,
single
you get
one.
mail, I get mail, and it's obviously not intuitively clear to many people that what evolution is. I was telling you just before this, I got a letter last night because I was doing something that happened to be on TV from a woman who said to me, well, okay, I don't know if she said she liked watching me on TV, but she said she did. And but she said, I just want to know one thing: who decided which ape would evolve and which wouldn't? But I think that's the kind of immediacy people have, and the confusion people have with evolution is the sense that that's exactly how it works, instead of working with populations. And so it is, this beautiful idea is still one step removed from our direct experience, and I think that's one of the reasons why, just one of the reasons why people are so many people are so abjectly opposed to it. It appears to go against what their direct experience. I think there's much more to it than that, but.
Ernst Mayr, the grand old man of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, who died at the age of 100 a couple of years ago, he put it down to essentialism, the modern name for what people like Plato, I mean, one could call it the dead hand of Plato. Essentialism means people think there's an essence of rabbit, an essence of rhinoceros. A rabbit is a rabbit is a rabbit, and rabbits have the same sort of eternal verity as triangles to Euclid. And I mean, maybe all the Greeks like that thought like geometers.
Yeah.
And so a rabbit was a thing which kind of hanging out there in space, the ideal rabbit. And so the idea of a rabbit evolving into anything else, or an ape evolving into anything else, is utterly foreign. But it seems to me that that's a different and much smaller order of foreignness than the idea of a particle going through two slits, and in some sense knowing whether I forget what you have to explain.
When I throw a baseball, I'm a big baseball fan. When I throw a baseball, it takes a known trajectory usually, and ends up in a catcher's hand, and we can calculate that, and we force students through endless boring calculations to calculate that. But when you throw an electron, of course, it doesn't do that. It does everything at once. It takes every possible way to get from one place to another, all at the same time. And we can demonstrate that with a wonderful experiment that actually was first performed by someone who was both a doctor and a physicist, Thomas Young, and who also, it's amazing what they did then. He also was one of the people that was essential in decoding the hieroglyphics. But an electron, when you send it out, and there are two slits, will go through both at the same time and interfere with itself when it comes out the other end, and therefore produce a very strange pattern on the other side of the slits. Now, if you say, well, look, this is ridiculous. The electron either went through one slit or the other. So I'll watch it. And you turn on a light, or an electron detector, and you watch it, and indeed, the electron does, each electron goes through one slit or the other. And you say, aha, but then you look behind the slit, and when you're watching it, the pattern is different. Having watched it, having measured it, you change the pattern, and so you know it was doing something very different when you weren't watching it. And that is very objectionable. And in fact, Einstein never, as you know, never came around to accepting that as a fact of life. And it is truly one of the strange. Relativity is much simpler to understand. Quantum mechanics is profoundly unnerving because of that, and it has many philosophical implications that many people are still disturbed about. And it's we're trying to understand. In fact, my own field, something I'm just working on, involves trying to understand if the universe is quantum mechanical. What does a measurement mean? Because if you're an external observer turning a light on an electron, then you can understand that you might affect it. But if the universe as a whole is a quantum mechanical system, which it surely is if quantum mechanics governs it, then what does it mean if you're inside of it? And one of the pictures that people use to guide themselves now, which is called the many worlds interpretation, which is just ridiculous, is that every time I look out at you, I force you to be in a specific configuration, just like that electron. But there's an infinite number of other universes that are existing at the same time in which, one of you is up here and I'm in the audience. And they're all coexisting at the same time. And so every time we make an observation, this quantum wave function of the universe branches into an infinite number. And it's just, and that infinity keeps multiplying. And it's probably the only classical way to understand what's happening, but it's so ridiculous that I think that most people wouldn't accept, and I'm not sure most physicists accept it.
You say it's ridiculous, but I mean, so is the alternative ridiculous. I mean, it's almost as though you need a ridiculous theory to understand this Jacques Monod, the great French molecular biologist, said the curious thing about natural selection is that everybody thinks he understands it, and they clearly don't. But is it that because people think they understand it, and therefore their skepticism is aroused, but they know they haven't a prayer of understanding quantum theory, so it doesn't, it's off the radar, and so they don't express skepticism about it?
I think it's more than that. I think there's an immediacy of evolution because it puts humans on the same, at some level, as all other animals. And we're going to be bound to get to this, so we may as well start now. I happen to think evolution is a straw man. It's really the attack on evolution, in this country at least, and I think largely elsewhere, is based on a fundamental fear of science. A fear that science is immoral because it doesn't explicitly mention God. Because God is not an explicit part of our discussions. And because God is not an explicit part of our discussions, therefore, it must be immoral. And that's why all these people are not so much trying to attack evolution per se, is to say what we want to do is, in fact, have a theistic understanding imposed upon science classes so that scientific materialism, which has led, if you look at the literature of these people, has led to all the evil things in the world, is now turned into a moral subject. So I think it's this immediacy that it's the biggest slap in the face to some people.
Yeah, but why wouldn't physics have that same effect?
No, because I think it's not so personal, which is one of the reasons why I think many people are more intimidated by physics, is because it's not so personal. Biology, I think it's one of the reasons biology is taught first in high schools, which I think is a huge mistake. And in fact, me and a physicist named Leon Letterman were working to try to get physics taught first, not because we like physics better, but because the reason maybe one of the reasons I'm not a doctor is that, I was taught biology and I had to memorize all this stuff. But in fact, of course, physics is the basis of chemistry, and chemistry is the basis of biology. So if you really want to understand biology at some level, you should understand things like energetics and
yes.
mechanisms. And so I think, but the reason biology is taught first, I think, is that many people feel, because it's about things you can see and touch and immediate things, it's much more intuitive and much more friendly. But at the same time, it's much more terrifying to, in some sense, for some people, to say that humans are on exactly the same plane at some level as every other animal that's ever walked across the earth. And for you, and you'd say that's a good thing, that it attacks that belief that some people have that humans are special and different. But for those other people, they'd say that's why science is bad. It shouldn't attack that because we are divinely inspired and God has created us in her image. I got into probably publicly talking about this in this country when in Ohio they were about to introduce the requirement in some sense that intelligent design be taught alongside evolution. And there was a debate that the Board of Education set up down in Columbus before the public and the board, and I was asked, just because I'd written something about this in the paper, asked to be on this along with another scientist who happens to be a religious biologist, Ken Miller, and then two members of the Discovery Institute. And we all thought that, I agree with you, by the way, not only do I not like the debate format, but in science it's actually very disingenuous.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it doesn't happen that way most of the time, but secondly, it gives the impression, and I'm sure you've had this, a lot of people want to be on stage to debate me about evolution or about alien abduction or whatever it is, because if you're reasonably presentable and your arguments are interesting, someone who's out there in the audience who doesn't necessarily know what's happening will come away from it in the end saying, well, he said, she said, it sounded reasonable on both sides. And so at that debate, I made it quite clear at the beginning that this was not representative, that if it had been representative, there would have been 10,000 scientists on one side of the table and two representatives of a wacky fringe group on the other side of the table. But it's very important. But we thought that they were going to get up and say, you know, all the reasons why intelligent design should be taught. But they're really brilliant, and they have much better marketing than scientists do for the most part. And one of the slimiest of them, who happens to be a philosopher, got up, and a rather intelligent man, he said, you know what, we don't want to force that. We're open-minded. We don't want you to require you to teach intelligent design. We just want you to teach the controversy. Now, what a brilliant statement. That was the first time it was used in this country. And it's brilliant because, of course, it's like asking, you know, when did you stop beating your wife? I mean, you can't, the minute you say it, it presumes there's a controversy, and it's brilliant because most people in this country believe that evolution is incredibly controversial, and in fact, I don't know if you know one of these statistics that's really scary. If you ask Americans, and this was done in a poll last year, forget that most Americans don't believe in evolution, at least when asked about it. That's true. By far, the majority don't believe in it. But they were asked, if, independent of what you believe, what should be taught in schools? Okay? 12% said evolution only. 24% said creationism only. And the rest of Americans were, you know, like to be open-minded, teach everything. So it's much scarier, in fact, than you might think otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, by the way, there are all sorts of creation myths that you could teach. I mean, you could have hundreds of different ones. I mean, I think maybe one way to retaliate is to say, well, let's teach the controversy about reproduction, and let's have equal time for the sex theory of reproduction and the stork theory of
Which is more important to you? Disabusing people of false notions, or convincing them to try and learn about the real things?
I'm always getting this problem. It's
I know, and that's why I brought it up.
Yeah. It's this matter of seduction and...
which is a word I've used with you, and I get
your
incredible
word.
trouble because of it.
And I had a little exchange with Neil deGrasse Tyson at the Beyond Belief conference, and he took me to task in very much the same terms as you have. I suppose in the particular case of the evolution-creation controversy, where I have been accused of rocking the boat and of spoiling the case for our side in the education debate, it was put to me most starkly by Rothschild, who is the lead lawyer for our side in the Dover, Pennsylvania case. And we had lunch together, we got on very well, and we talked a lot. And then at the end he said, well, thank goodness we didn't call you as an expert witness. And he was absolutely right. I would have been a disaster as an expert witness, because the lawyer for the other side would simply have said, Mr. Dawkins, is it true that you came to your atheism through evolution? And I would have had to say yes. And then he would have simply have said, my case rests, because that's enough to damn it. So the seduction technique there would be to go out to people and say, look, I appreciate, I respect your religion. I think your religion's great, but your religion is perfectly compatible with evolution. And you can believe, if you like, that God set evolution going. Maybe God helps evolution over some of the difficult jumps,
I don't know. So I don't think. Obviously, I've been accused of the seduction side, and which I'm proud of. But I think the point is that you have to. You don't have to go bend over backwards that much. But I think that the largest impact I've ever had is going to fundamentalist colleges and saying just simply the simple statement that you don't have to be an atheist to believe in evolution.
Yeah.
And that is so... I've had kids come up to me and say, I've never heard anyone say that. I always thought you had to.
How could they possibly not have heard anyone say that? Did they ever talk to a clergyman, a bishop, an archbishop?
The clergy... No, you see, this isn't the Church of England.
Okay.
This is... No, it's true. These kids, every Sunday, from the time they're too young to think, and that's why both you and I absolutely agree that I think it's sort of child abuse to subject children to that. But But they are told that. They are told that in this country, and that is why many of them just have this gut reaction, because if I have to be an atheist to believe in evolution, I clearly am not going to believe in evolution because it's a threat to my belief. But if you just tell them it doesn't require that, then it is eye-opening and useful. At the same time, I think it's disingenuous not to point out that there are tensions, and our mutual friend Steven Weinberg, another physicist, has put it, I think, most eloquently by saying science doesn't make it impossible to believe in God. It just makes it possible to not believe in God.
Yes. Well, I want to go further than that. I think that, as you were talking then, I thought I could put it exactly the other way around. You can go to these people in their churches, fundamentalist churches, and you say, look, you don't have to be an atheist to believe in evolution. Now, if your aim is to propagandize in favor of evolution, that obviously is the best seduction technique. But if your aim is to kill religion, as mine is, then just let me finish. If your aim is to kill religion, then since evolution is manifestly true, then if there are people out there who really believe that if you are an evolutionist, you've got to be an atheist, then all I've got to do is to persuade them of evolution, which should be comparatively easy, since the evidence is overwhelming, and I'll turn them all into atheists.
Yeah, I don't think you're convincing many people to be atheists. What you're doing is convincing people who are receptive to those ideas already not to be afraid to have those ideas in public, which I think is very important. So in some sense, I think we're speaking to complementary groups. At some level, the resonance, the number of copies your book has sold, I think is an example that you're really reaching people who are sympathetic, but in some sense needed ammunition and an understanding and a coherent picture of this. And so I think that the approach you're taking works extremely well and is vitally important for those people who are receptive. And I guess the approach I've tried to take most recently is the approach for people who aren't receptive, and that's seduction.
Yeah.
And that's to say, and the end result may be hoping that they might think one way or another about God, but it actually isn't. It really is hoping that they'll just open their minds enough to realize that the real world, the world as it actually is not evil. It's neither good nor evil, but it's remarkable. And the way to understand the physical world is to use science. And so I think we're really actually speaking at different audiences. I'm not convinced. In fact, I'm pretty convinced that, and maybe you can give me counterexamples, that the confirmed, deeply faithful probably resent and close their minds to what you're saying so early that you're really not turning them around. What you're doing is a very important task, which is to point out that, look, there's a large body of the American public, and it may be a minority, but it's a bigger minority than many individual religions that actually don't believe in God, and it's about time that politicians understood that. And in fact, this really came home to me during this presidential election, and one of the reasons I've been trying to get this debate to happen, with which, and I'm pleased to say Richard's wearing one of our pins, as I'm wearing one of his. But that when Mitt Romney gave this speech, which was supposed to be the equivalent of a speech that John Kennedy had given many years earlier about separation of church and state, and his speech was exactly the opposite. In fact, the speech basically said, there is no room in the state for those that don't go to church. Yeah. And
doesn't matter which church you go to, as long as you go to one.
And for that, it's vitally important that you raise the consciousness of the media and politicians and of individuals that there are a large bunch of people who don't believe in God, and they're not bad, they're not worse, they're not anything. And so it's vitally important, but I do think we're speaking to different audiences, and I wanted to see what you thought.
I think that's fine, and maybe that's the right way to go about it. I mean, there are these two audiences, they both need speaking to. I think I compared it a couple of days ago to the good cop, bad cop.
Exactly. My wife, who was in the audience, says it's the first time I've ever been called a good cop. So.
Well, I was the bad cop until Christopher Hitchens came along.
Well, you know, so what? Actually, so do you think Christopher Hitchens goes too far? I'll put you on.
He's one of the most eloquent people I've ever heard.
Yes.
He has a thrilling voice, like Richard Burton. I'd hate to have him on the other side of me in any argument. If we ever talked about the Iraq War, I'd be on the other side of him.
I've tried, and it's very difficult.
And I wouldn't wish that. No, I don't think he goes too far on anything else apart from the Iraq War. I think...
Okay, so really you don't... Okay, that's interesting, because...
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, but I was under the impression that, we talked about one of my favorite lines in his book, which I really shouldn't say in a public forum, but I will.
No, we don't. Okay.
No, you don't want to go there.
I know what that one is.
Read his book. But it is an interesting line, and I'll be happy to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Which is where he discusses what he says. What he says is the motto of the Roman Catholic Church, which is "No child's behind left." And okay, now your purpose is to destroy religion. Is that really your purpose?
No.
Let me say, I don't think it really is.
It was an interesting piece of contrarian reasoning to what you were saying, because you were saying you don't have to be an atheist to believe in evolution, and that, of course, is exactly. I mean, then I tell people to go and read Ken Miller, Francis Collins, and indeed any reputable clergyman. But if a larger view is that the presence or absence of a God in the universe is, that's a huge question. I think it's a scientific question. I have a view on it, and I try to raise consciousness about it. Then, if it's true that there are lots and lots of people who think that evolution is incompatible with religion, and I actually do think it is, you see, I actually do think it is. But even if I didn't, if I were a propagandist trying to destroy religion, I would seize on that, because it doesn't follow that because there are people who think that that if you believe in evolution, you've got to be an atheist. Therefore, the obvious conclusion is to say, oh, no, you don't have to be. I mean, you could do it exactly the other way around and say, yes, well, matter of fact, yes, you do have to be an atheist if you believe in evolution. And here's all the evidence for evolution, and you can't get away from it. Well, of course, that wouldn't go down well with Ken Miller or Francis Collins. But I could come back and give good arguments for why I think there actually is an incompatibility.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But would you really have a hope of success if you're working against something that's instilled in children from the time they're very young, and it doesn't go into their brain, it goes somewhere else? So that
probably not.
I think if you say to people, and I think it's an interesting idea, but if you say to people, yeah, you have to be an atheist to believe in evolution, you're not, because of that, because faith is so emotional, you're not going to get past that point, I think.
Well, I think that's right. And as a matter of fact, I do recommend Kenneth Miller's book to any religious person who writes to me. And so that's your answer. I mean, I do, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I mean, and I knew you did. And I think that, I mean, presumably, well, let me ask another question, maybe near the end, and then you can ask me one at the end, I guess. When you were writing The Selfish Gene, which is your first book, I mean, the purpose was to explain the remarkable aspects of evolution. It probably had nothing to do with religion at the time.
No, of course. I mean, my main purpose is science and the education in science. I suppose there's a slight difference in that I do think the existence of God is a scientific question. I'm not one of those I don't go along with Steve Gould on that. I mean, I think it is a scientific question.
You wrote Selfish Gene, and I've written my books because we find the real world so amazing that it'd be better if more people knew about it. And I guess, and part of my reason there is somewhat the same as yours, are not so much focused against incorrect beliefs, but I actually think the world would be a better place if we were willing to understand, just accept it for what it is.
Absolutely.
And without fear and without terror, and that would, if that governed public policy, just to say, well, public policy and our life will be based on accepting the world for what it is, without preconception and fear, then the world would be a better place.
Absolutely. I couldn't, I mean, I can't disagree with that. My whole life has been devoted to explaining science because it's wonderful. I mean, here we are on this planet, and maybe the only planet in the universe where there is anything capable of understanding why it's there. Our brain may be the only object in the entire universe that has the capacity to understand, to internalize the universe in the sense of setting up a model of the universe. So it is an amazing privilege to be alive to be capable of understanding, to be alive in the 21st century, when understanding of the universe and of life is far, far greater than in any past century. We should make the most of that, and those people who are deprived of the opportunity to learn about how wonderful reality is, it's simply tragic that they should go to their grave missing out on the opportunities that an understanding of science, not the practice of science necessarily, not Bunsen burners and things, but understanding the scientific method and understanding what an enormous amount is known, and the challenge of how much is not known.
Exactly.
And how much there is still work yet to do.
Yeah, and we give people the impression that scientists really want to, and in fact, people use that who are countering science all the time. They say scientists, they have this picture, and it's a story. First of all, that's the first thing they tell about science. It's a story. It's not a story. It's more than a story. It makes predictions, and that's vitally important. But they want to have this little bit of knowledge, and they don't want it to be attacked. When in fact it's exactly the opposite. The thing that drives scientists forward, certainly drives me and everyone else I know, is actually the stuff we don't understand. And moreover, it's not as if we want to always agree with our colleagues, because the way you get famous is by proving them wrong. And that's what you go into work every day, is you want to prove all your colleagues wrong. And in fact, getting back to education, to me, the one thing that I hope every student has at some point in their life, and I tell this explicitly, and I think it's really profoundly important, the one experience that I hope you have in either high school or college or somewhere in your education is to have some belief that you profoundly, deeply hold prove to be wrong. Because that is the most eye-opening experience you can have, and as a scientist, to me, it's the most exciting experience I could ever have. So
I think we should switch to two questions.
I think what I would have said would be much closer to Richard if I hadn't had the experience of actually debating the head of the Intelligent Design Network in St. Louis, and he was actually one of the few people in that whole program who actually believed what he was doing and believed in what he was doing. It wasn't just a con job, and he said, look, scientists really are trying to destroy our faith, and he presented a letter from 50 Nobel laureates about evolution, about what happened, and that there is no evidence of purpose or design in life. But the letter then went on to say, and therefore there was no purpose in design. And he pointed this as an example, and it really hit me. Yeah, he's right, because that second statement, I don't believe, is a scientific one. I think it's a philosophical statement. It's a philosophical statement that I happen to, that resonates with me. But as Carl Sagan once said, and he stole it from someone else, evidence of absence is not absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And so there may be no evidence for purpose in the universe, but that doesn't imply that there is no purpose in the universe. It's a question that you can have a feeling about and still do the science and have very different views about. And so when you make the second statement, it's fine to make it. But I think you have to say that maybe you're being informed by your lifetime of scientific experience, but it's not, I don't believe, a scientific statement. And I think it's very difficult to know, and I happen to think we'll never, because it's not a question you can answer in the negative, I mean scientifically. The absence of evidence of purpose will never prove that there is no purpose. And I'm sure, I know Richard has a very good example of how ridiculous that statement can be, going back to Bertrand Russell, so maybe you'll want to talk about it. But it could be answered in the positive. That's the point. If tomorrow or tonight, because I'm here and not in Cleveland, I could look up and see stars. If tonight the stars spelled out, I am here, then I think most scientists say, there's something there. And so positive evidence is certainly possible. Negative evidence is not. And so you have to, at that point, you're subject to philosophy. And I don't think science can make a definitive statement about that. But maybe you want to.
I think that's the first time this evening I really disagreed with
Oh, good.
Lawrence.
Okay.
I mean, unless you think there is a supernatural being in the universe, which neither of us do, what could purpose in the universe possibly mean? I mean, what would it look like? What would it be? Why would we even want to use a word like purpose of the universe? It seems to me obvious that it's linked to a theological belief. Now, in my own field of biology, we use the word purpose in a sort of metaphorical sense. There's purpose in a bird's wing and purpose in an eye, and these are the illusion of purpose is built up by natural selection in a way that's very well understood. But if you ask, what's the purpose of a mountain, or what's the purpose of the universe, or what's the purpose of time, or what's the purpose of space, it's not just meaningless, it's stupid. Rather than trying to seduce people by saying evolution is fully compatible with your religion, which I don't think it is, to say evolution is not a handbook of immorality and violence. It doesn't lead to Hitlerism. It doesn't degrade humanity to be related to other apes. I say other apes because, of course, we are apes. We're not just descended from apes. So maybe that's a kind of seduction technique I could buy into. I wouldn't have to compromise my principles by saying evolution is compatible with your supernaturalist hogwash. But what I could say is evolution is fully compatible with your morality, with the fact that you don't steal, you don't kill, and you're not a racist. All these things could be done with a sufficiently sophisticated interpretation of evolution, I have to add, not a naive interpretation. Yeah. Well, as you say, I'm not an American, and I have to be a bit careful treading in this field. Not that I often am, but it is certainly very noticeable that American politicians cannot make a speech without mentioning God. British politicians cannot ever mention God when making a speech. There are religious British politicians. Tony Blair is a very religious man, just been indeed received, would you believe, into the Roman Catholic Church. But whenever challenged to wear his religion on his sleeve, he would retreat hastily. And he was challenged by Jeremy Paxman, who's Britain's most aggressive television interviewer. He said, in a kind of sneering way, "Is it really true, Mr. Blair, that you actually pray with George Bush?" and Blair said, no.
One of the reasons that religion is so successful here, it would be better if we didn't have a separation of church and state, if we had a state religion. Because if you have a state religion, everyone ignores it, like in England. And it becomes impotent, because capitalism just works. And so we've forced religions in this country to become entrepreneurial. And they've been incredibly successful because of it. So if we just had a state religion, then it'd be fun. Then no one would want to talk about it anymore.
I think there's a lot in that. I mean, you've no idea how boring the Church of England is.
I want to ask, actually, in that regard, I wanted to ask you. It's interesting that evolution is taught at the end of biology class, because there was, I forget which famous biologist said, nothing in biology makes sense without evolution.
It was Dobzhansky,
yeah.
but any biologist would say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to ask if one of the things that's really scary to me in this country, and my daughter went to a rather liberal school, private school, but her teacher, and this is where they've been really successful, even if they haven't distorted the curriculum, they've instilled enough fear in teachers that there are many teachers in this country, biology teachers, who won't mention the word evolution, not because it's not there, but they're just afraid. And even in my daughter's school, I remember her biology teacher basically apologized each time he mentioned the word evolution. I was just shocked, but it happens.
Well, all right, I mean, that's a major evil. What are we going to do about it? It's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. Teachers are being intimidated. I mean, are there any teachers here who can testify to that by any chance? Yeah.
Yes, there's one in front. I can't
say.
So,
are you being intimidated by children, by parents, by other teachers, by what? Parents.
Well, you know, but it's even more to me. You know what happened in Texas. So the school board official recommended there was an event on evolution, a bunch of interesting speakers, and the school official and the school board sent out the notice that this event was happening, and she got fired because she didn't present the other. She didn't talk about the other side. Can you believe that? But that's the kind of intimidation that actually happens, and it's really scary.
Well, I don't know if there's anything I can do to help, but I kind of feel the need to do something. Well, no, I agree.
Let me turn it around, and maybe you can comment afterwards. But you know, obviously, I think science, and that's what's really important. And I've used lots of examples, and I won't. In fact, there's one example I used in the dialogue with Richard that I won't repeat here about the Big Bang as being a scientific issue, not a social one. But at the same time, let me put it around the other way and say I'm worried that more people don't know that science, that some basic literacy in science is vitally important for social issues. And the example I want to use, and the reason when I wrote my piece in the Wall Street Journal a while ago calling for a science debate was when Mr. Huckabee at the time, as you'll remember during the debates, all of you know that he was one of 3 people who said, I don't believe in evolution. But what was more upsetting to me was the statement that he made in the next debate, which was, I'm running for president. I'm not running to write an 8th grade science curriculum, so why should it matter whether I know the Earth is 6,000 years old or not? Okay? And what really upset me was not that statement, but the fact that a poll the next day of the American public, everyone agreed with him. I mean, a majority of the American public agreed with him. And the thought to me that you could be scientifically illiterate and yet be prepared to tackle the problems of this country, we wouldn't accept someone who didn't know the Holocaust happened, for example, or didn't know enough history to know anything about that as having enough perspective to make rational decisions. Yet we're perfectly comfortable with people proclaiming, not just admitting, but proudly proclaiming their scientific literacy, and yet allowing them to make vitally important issues, judgments on social issues. So I don't want a scientist president.
It's not just a matter of needing science in order to make judgments of things where science is relevant, because of course science is relevant all the time. It's that somebody who is going through life on this planet without having a comprehension of why he's here, how he comes to be here, what the planet is, what the universe is. I mean, how can you live your life in ignorance of the world in which you live and expect to be a full human being capable of governing other full human beings? So it isn't just that a scientifically ignorant president will make wrong decisions about issues such as global warming or abortion or something like that. It's more that you wouldn't wish to be governed by somebody who, I don't know, thought he lived on a flat earth, or was just completely divorced from reality in that kind of way. It's an indication that this man is thick. He's stupid.
Are you talking about anyone in particular? No. But let me just say also, to add to that, it's more than that. It's not only a tragedy, it's criminal, that these are the most interesting, among the most interesting and fascinating intellectual achievements. Again, forget the practicality. The ideas that science has exposed, and it's just criminal and sad to think no more than would we want to have a child grow up without having some understanding of some exposure to them, then we would want a child to never be exposed to Shakespeare.
Exactly. One of the stupidest things Sherlock Holmes ever said was more or less the first thing he said to Dr. Watson. He divulged in conversation with Watson that Holmes didn't know something about the names of the planets, I mean Jupiter and Saturn and things like that. And Watson was absolutely shocked, and rightly so. And Holmes said, "But Watson, I don't need to know about the planets in order to solve my criminal cases." That is such a short-sighted view. Well, Conan Doyle was, as you know, believed in fairies, so.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that comes back to what I said before. Before someone will listen to you, you have to get them to be interested. And I think the big problem, maybe it's not a problem, but for many people, they just don't find the questions interesting. And I think, if I thought the questions weren't interesting, I wouldn't be doing it. But what I found is if you find the right way to seduce someone into being interested in those things, then the well opens up, and it's just a sea of questions because they are basic issues. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Are we alone in the universe? What are we made of? And so I think one has to just overcome the tragic de-education that we do in this country. I mean, here's a scary statistic. So we compare American students to their counterparts in 20, 25 other industrialized nations. And there was a recent study that you may have heard came came out. So we look at kids in grade 3 and grade 5 and then 15-year-olds. And what's amazing is in grade 3 and grade 5, American students on the whole do better in science and mathematics than their counterparts around the world. But by the time they're 15, they do substantially worse. So we've been doing something very effective to de-educate them or disinterest them in science. And one of the reasons is another equally scary fact, which is that over 90% of middle school science teachers in this country have never taken a science course outside of high school. And
what percentage was
over
that?
90%.
90?
90, yeah.
Not 9.
No, 90. And I saw it happen to our daughter when she was in school. In grade 2, I remember going into her school, you know, and I mean, what do you do? In grade 2, it's like it's light during the day, dark at night. I mean, those are the kind of things you're talking about. But the teacher was terrified. And that could not help but get across to the students that it was scary, it was terrifying, it was complex. And so it is, I think, a problem that we convince our students partly because we have people teaching who don't feel comfortable with it, that they should feel uncomfortable and interested. And, you know, and you can do very well. I taught at Yale University for what seemed like an eternity. And I've learned that you know, you can be very successful in this world with not only just being scientifically literate, but proudly proclaiming it. And it's unfortunate. It really is.
But I think that if you were to talk to a creationist of, I was going to say any sophistication, but I'm not sure that such a thing exists. They would say something like, "Oh, we're quite happy with microevolution.
Yeah.
It's only macroevolution we worry about, and the mutation and selection of a pathogenic organism in a hospital. That's all microevolution." That unfortunately they get a lot of aid and comfort from some circles in biology who add fuel to that by pretending that there really is a distinction between microevolution and macroevolution, instead of realizing that, as we've known since the modern synthesis, macroevolution is just microevolution going on for a very long time. And that's one of the problems that people have in understanding.
Well, I think to add to that, I mean, I've gotten in trouble because I've exactly written that, and not so much in terms of evolution, but I argued that if you say the Earth is 6,000 years old, you shouldn't drive a car, you shouldn't get in a plane, you shouldn't do anything because you're being hypocritical, because all of these things depend. The thing is that people don't realize the connectedness of science, so it's okay. You know, they think it's just a bunch of separate stories, and that's often the way we teach it. And it's okay not to believe this part of the story, but you should believe that part of the story. But at the same time, the thing is, at some basic level, what always amazes me is no matter what people say, they ultimately realize that science is the way to go when it comes to concerns. For example, you know, President Bush said we should teach both intelligent design and evolution because we should teach students what the debate is all about. Now, that is not an intrinsically stupid statement, surprisingly, but it's actually quite rational. What it represents is ignorance, and not ignorance in a pejorative sense, ignorance of the fact that there is no debate. But the interesting thing is, when the avian flu became a big issue in this country, what you heard was the president say we have to quickly determine how fast it's mutating from birds to humans. You never heard one person in his administration say, you know, it's been designed to kill us. You know, just forget about it. So at some point, people understand that when really it comes to the crises, no matter what they say to pollsters and whatever, it's amazing to me that we're so bimodal or whatever that we can just sort of say, okay, we really need the science because it's the only thing that's going to save us.
There are plenty of excellent communicators among young scientists, and I think they just need official encouragement to get out there and communicate.
Well, actually, I want to turn that around a little bit because, yeah, there's the large-scale kudos one gets, as, you know, when you're a professional, but you got to reach that point. And the interesting thing is, I do think we do a tremendous disservice to students because we don't instill the notion of communication. And in fact, we don't explain to them that you actually, a large part of succeeding as a professional scientist is in fact your ability to communicate. I've seen, I mean, it's chair of a physics department for many years, and I've seen when we hire people, how people who are in some sense equally able get, one of the things that distinguishes, one of these things that determine sometimes whether we hire people are how well they communicate to us about their ideas. And I was on a visiting committee at MIT a few years ago, which was trying to do something really interesting. Right now, when we take our science, they were worried more about engineering students, but it works the same way. We require them, to take some writing course, right? And the writing course is taught by some bozo they never heard of, right? I mean, from their point of view. We don't, and we should start to impose the requirement of writing and oral communication as a part of our physics courses and our engineering courses. Why? Because these students view the professors of physics and engineering as their mentors. Those are the people they care about. And if they're not telling them how important to communicate it is, then if they just have to take something from column B to get their degree, it doesn't matter. So what I really think we do have to do in our educational system is make students realize and make an important part of all of the curriculum, not just the writing part, but of a physics class and an engineering class and a biology class, that oral and written communication are incredibly important. Because in fact, for engineers, it's really true that their abilities to succeed as an engineer are not so dependent upon their intrinsic abilities as engineers as later on when they work in companies, how well they can convince their colleagues and how well they can make presentations. And we really do a disservice, I think, to our students not to indicate that their success in their own field